Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to provide you with an update as to what's happening in the South China Sea. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that there's rising tension between China and the Philippines over the disputed waters. China has laid claim to the vast majority of this ocean, despite the fact that the international law courts have said that the Philippines have the right to an exclusion zone of at least 200 nautical miles from their coast. But China has completely disregarded that international ruling and has actually set up a blockade in the waters to stop Philippines vessels from being able to reach their troops that are located on a sunken warship on one of the shoals. Now, over the course of the last 12 months or so, things have started to heat up, and China have issued multiple warnings to Philippines vessels. And in the latest incident that we'll talk about in today's video, there's actually been 2 collisions between Chinese boats and Philippines boats. Now, the Philippines have issued a press release saying that the reason for these collisions is the dangerous and provocative actions of the Chinese Coast Guard. And the USA, Canada, Japan and the European Union have all come out in support of the Philippines. However, the Chinese authorities are saying that these collisions are entirely the fault of the Philippines. So there's no doubt that the tension between the Philippines and China is increasing. But of course, the real reason why this is a major concern globally is that the USA is standing firmly behind the Philippines. And in fact, in May of this year, the USA actually issued renewed guidelines relating to the 1951 treaty between the USA and the Philippines, in which the USA have clearly stated that they will support the Philippines in defending the South China Sea. So obviously the potential risk here is that if these conflicts do flare up and if a boat does get sunk, then that could draw the USA in, and there is already a lot of tension between the USA and China right now. The USA have issued sanctions against a lot of chip companies, which prevents China from being able to get hold of a lot of advanced technology, including artificial intelligence. And since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which started in February 2022, relations between China and Russia have improved, and both countries have stated that they want an unlimited partnership. So there's a lot of tension between the USA and China. So in today's video, we'll have a look at the old warship that the Philippines have stationed their military personnel on. We'll have a look at the warnings that have been issued by China and the skirmishes that have taken place between the two nations. We'll then have a look at some video that's been released by the Philippines Coast Guard of the 2 collisions and the official responses from the Philippines, China and the other nations. In terms of the relationship between the USA and the Philippines, we'll have a look at the increased number of bases that the Philippines have opened up to the USA and the increase in the tension between the USA and China. We'll then go on to have a look at exactly what the dispute in the South China Sea relates to, because the South China Sea isn't just a body of water with fishing rights. There is also potentially oil and gas underneath the water, and there are also a lot of different small islands and shoals, some of which have been occupied by China. And then finally today I'll wrap up with my summary as to what I think is likely to happen over the course of the next 3 to 6 months, and whether there is any real potential for this situation to boil over into some form of military conflict. But before we get started on all of that, I'd like to say once again, thank you so much to everybody that's bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks. Really appreciate that. I do try to respond to most of them, but if I haven't responded to yours, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to see more face-to-face videos and find a way of avoiding all of the adverts, and also get to see some things that I'm not posting on YouTube and get early access to my videos, then please have a look at my Patreon channel. However, if you don't like Patreon and you'd still like to support the channel, please have a look below where you'll find links to buy me a coffee, as well as YouTube's super thanks and membership scheme.
A dispute between China and the Philippines over a sunken warship has heated up. The warship, which dates back to World War II, is used by the Philippines as a military outpost. It was purposely grounded in 1999 to reinforce Manila's sovereignty claims in the Spratly archipelago. Beijing wants the ship to be towed away, but Manila remains defiant.
We continue to assert our territorial rights in the face of all of these challenges, and consistent with the international law and UNCLOS especially.
China claims sovereignty over almost the entire South China Sea, which overlaps with the waters of Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, Taiwan and the Philippines. In response, China's foreign ministry released a statement reiterating its request for the warship to be removed, adding that its, quote, goodwill and sincerity on the issue had been ignored.
So China has laid claim to the vast majority of the South China Sea. However, it's not just laying claims, it's actually sending out its warships to protect the area. And in this video you can see the blockade that the Chinese authorities have set up in the waters. And the Philippines supply boats, which are trying to get to the sunken warship, which is sitting on the shoal and has Philippines personnel posted on there permanently, are facing this blockade on a daily basis. And the actions being taken by the Chinese Coast Guard and the Chinese Navy are starting to raise tension. And this is now really becoming the focal point of the problems between Philippines and China. But it's not just the supplies to the sunken warship that are causing problems. These blockades are also causing problems for the fishermen of the Philippines, who are no longer able to access the waters to collect all of their fish.
Footage released by the Chinese Coast Guard shows its ship spraying a Philippine vessel with a water cannon in what Beijing described as a warning to Manila. The Philippine vessel had been carrying supplies to a grounded warship in a disputed area of the South China Sea. In February, the Philippines accused Chinese Coast Guards of using a laser to try to disrupt another resupply mission to its troops.
Unidentified foreign vessel at vicinity water of Hulian, Philippines. You are anchored within the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone. What is your intention? Over. You are not responding. You are advised to leave the area immediately. Over.
This is China Coast Guard Vessel 5201. Since you have disregarded our warning, we will take further necessary measures on you in accordance with the laws, and any consequences entailed will be borne by you. Over.
China Coast Guard 5201. We are proceeding according to our plan route. Request to stay clear from our passage in accordance with the collision regulation. Over.
The Philippines Coast Guard have released multiple videos showing the collisions that have taken place between the Chinese Coast Guard and the Philippines vessels. And one of the big questions that everybody's asking is, did the small Philippines wooden boat deliberately drive into the large white Chinese Coast Guard vessel, or was it the other way round? Did the Chinese Coast Guard deliberately steer into the path of the Philippines vessel? And in this video you can see that the front of the white ship clearly clips the back of the Philippines vessel as it sails past. Now, whilst this collision is relatively tame and doesn't sink the Philippines vessel, this incident was clearly far more dangerous from the small wooden Philippines vessel's point of view than it was from the huge Chinese metal Coast Guard ship's perspective. And this clearly causes surprise and concern for the sailors on the Philippines vessel. Now, in response to this, the Chinese authorities have said that the collision was the fault of the Philippines vessel because it sailed too close to the Chinese Coast Guard ship. So both sides are blaming each other. And the Coast Guard have released multiple different angles of the collision from different videos that were taken on board the Philippines vessel. And from this angle, it's hard to know whether or not the Philippines vessel did sail in front of the Chinese Coast Guard, or if the Chinese Coast Guard deliberately decided to drive into the Philippines boat. Now, this video shows the other collision that took place between the Chinese Coast Guard and the Philippines vessel, and this was described as a slight bump by the Chinese authorities. And you can see that basically the two ships have drifted very close to each other, and for whatever reason the captains of both of these ships have decided to let them collide. So it looks like neither of the captains wanted to give any ground. They decided not to pull away from the collision, and they've let the two ships collide. But again, this is just causing more tension and more aggravation. In response to the collisions, the National Task Force of the Philippines issued the following statement. At around 6:04 this morning, while conducting a regular and routine rotation and resupply mission to the BRP Sierra Madre, dangerous blocking manoeuvres of China Coast Guard vessel 5203 caused it to collide with the armed forces of the Philippines contracted indigenous resupply boat Uneza May 2, approximately 13.5 nautical miles east-northeast of LS-57. The provocative, irresponsible and illegal action of CCGV 5203 imperiled the safety of the crew of the UM-2. During the same rotation and resupply mission, Philippine Coast Guard vessel MRRV 4409's port side was bumped by Chinese maritime militia vessel 00003, while it was lying approximately 6.4 nautical miles northeast of the Ayungin Shoal. The rotation and resupply mission is still ongoing, with the NASA May 1 reaching BRP Sierra Madre to successfully resupply our troops and personnel stationed there. Relevant authorities are briefed of the incident and developments in the ongoing rotation and resupply mission. The National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea condemns in the strongest degree the latest dangerous, irresponsible and illegal actions of the CCG and the Chinese maritime militia done this morning in violation of Philippine sovereignty, sovereign rights and jurisdiction, and in utter blatant disregard of the United Nations Charter, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, Convention of the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea, COLREGs, and relevant international maritime conventions, and the 2016 Arbitral Award. In response, China's Coast Guard said there had been a slight collision between one of its ships and the Philippine boat, while the Coast Guard was lawfully blocking the boat from transporting illegal construction materials to the warship. China's Coast Guard said in a statement the Philippine vessel had ignored repeated warnings, crossed the bow of the Chinese ship, and deliberately provoked trouble, causing the collision. The Philippines' behaviour seriously violates the international rules on avoiding collisions at sea and threatens the navigation safety of our vessels, the Coast Guard said. The Chinese Foreign Ministry went on to say that China has maintained great restraint and patience on this issue. The ministry went on to say that China has long maintained intensive communication with Manila, which has, however, disregarded China's goodwill. China will continue to take the necessary measures in accordance with domestic and international laws to safeguard its territorial sovereignty. The US ambassador to Manila, Mary Kay Carlson, said in a post on X that the United States condemns the PRC's latest disruption of a legal Philippines resupply mission to Ayungin Shoal, putting the lives of Filipino service members at risk. She added that Washington was standing with its allies to help protect Philippine sovereignty and to support a free and open Indo-Pacific region. The Canadian and Japanese embassies in Manila also expressed support for the Philippines and alarm over the collision, and the European Union's ambassador, Luc Veron, said these incidents, their repetition and intensification, are dangerous and very disturbing. Last week, the Philippines military demanded China stop its dangerous and offensive actions after a Chinese Navy ship shadowed and attempted to cut off a Philippine naval vessel conducting a resupply mission. In another incident during the same resupply mission, it said a Philippine Coast Guard vessel's port side was bumped by a Chinese maritime militia vessel.
I have always said that it seems to me that the future of the Philippines, and for that matter the Asia Pacific, will always have to involve the United States.
In a clear statement that relations between the Philippines and the USA are strengthening, the Philippines have announced that it's identified 4 additional military bases that the USA can gain access to, in addition to the 9 bases that the USA can currently access. This map shows the 9 military bases that the Philippines opened up to the USA as part of the 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement between the two nations. As you can see from the map, the military bases are spread across a wide geographic area, which potentially enables the USA to provide full coverage of the whole of the Philippines. But the bases that have caused most concern in China are those located on the island of Luzon, which are closest to the disputed island of Taiwan. And 3 of the 4 additional bases that the USA and the Philippines are in discussion over are also located close to Taiwan, and the other is close to the disputed area of the Spratly Islands. This map of the South China Sea shows the 6 countries that have laid claim to the sea, being China, Taiwan, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei and Vietnam. And as you can see, the South China Sea sits between all of these different countries. And you can see that there's a lot going on this map. We've got 3 distinct island groups. The Paracels is a small group of islands that's located towards the north of the South China Sea and is closest in proximity to both Vietnam and China. The Scarborough Shoal Islands are located close to the Philippines, and the Spratlys are located closest to Malaysia. Now, if you look at this map, it's slightly confusing because we've got red lines and blue lines on it. The red lines delineate China's 9-dash line, and we'll come on to talk about that in more detail in a moment. And the blue lines here show the 200 nautical mile exclusion zone for each of the 6 countries. So if we look at Vietnam first, it's the easiest one to see. You can see the shape of Vietnam, which is shown in grey on the left-hand side of this map. And the 200-mile nautical exclusion zone matches the outline of the Vietnam coastline, apart from a section at the top where we've got sea that sits between Vietnam and China, and the blue line then moves down the middle, so it's less than 200 nautical miles from both countries. And if we move around the map in an anti-clockwise direction, you can see that there's a blue line in the middle of the sea between Vietnam and Malaysia. We've then got a delineated section for Brunei, which is a very small country that's located along the coast that Malaysia actually sits around. So you can see there's a rectangular section for the Brunei section. We've then got a separation of the sea between Malaysia and the Philippines. We've got a 200-mile exclusion zone around the Philippines. And then as we move around to the top, we've got a 200-mile exclusion zone around China and Taiwan. And obviously there is a dispute ongoing between China and Taiwan. China does not recognise Taiwan as an independent country. It believes Taiwan is actually part of China, but obviously the Taiwanese rulers believe that they are an independent nation. And then right in the middle of this ocean, you can see where the words Paracels, South China Sea and Spratlys are written on this map. We've got a zone that's in no man's land, that's basically outside of the 200-mile nautical mile exclusive exclusion zone that was created by the UNCLOS agreement. So basically what this map shows is that if we were following the UNCLOS agreement, we would have a very clear delineation as to who owns what in terms of the sea, and therefore who's got the fishing rights and who has the exclusive rights to any oil and gas that was discovered in the land sitting underneath the sea. However, the reason that there is a South China Sea dispute is that China has laid claim to the vast majority of these waters. The 9-dash line that's sitting close to all of the countries on this map was drawn up by China following the end of World War II and basically shows the whole of the area that China has laid claim to. And the history of the 9-dash line dates back to 1947, when the government of the Republic of China first published a map laying claim to the vast majority of the South China Sea. Now, interestingly, at that time, there were 11 dashes on the map. However, 2 were subsequently removed due to improving relations between China and North Vietnam, so it became a 9-dash line. Now, the 9-dash line has never been ratified by any of the other countries. They do not agree with China that it owns the vast majority of this ocean, and that's where this dispute has arisen. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video firstly to give you an update as to what's happening in the South China Sea. And as we've seen from today's footage, there have been 2 collisions that have taken place. They were both very minor collisions. You saw in the video footage that there wasn't a risk of any of those ships sinking. These were literally just minor bumps. However, in terms of what's actually going on in the South China Sea, I don't think the severity of these collisions is the point here. If you look at what's been happening over the last 12 months, there has been an increase in the amount of conflict between the Philippines and China. Their vessels are coming into contact on a regular basis, and they're now starting to actually have some interaction. You saw in the other footage that earlier this year, the Chinese Coast Guard actually started spraying the Philippines' boats, and they've also been targeting them with lasers. So this collision is the latest incident in a number of different incidents. And what we're seeing from both countries involved here is that they both believe that they have a sovereign right to this water. The Philippines are backed by international law and the High Court ruling, and also supported by the West. However, China say that the South China Sea belongs predominantly to them, and therefore nobody is allowed into their waters. And what we're now seeing on the water is the Coast Guards and the navies of both countries are backing up that talk with their actions. So if the current trend for conflict continues, there is a genuine possibility that we could see some real conflict happening at some point over the next 3 to 6 months. And there is a possibility that one of these boats could get into difficulty and may actually sink. And if that happened, if we saw a Philippines boat actually being sunk, then that would be a big call for the USA to have to make. Would they be prepared to step in and actually take some military action to send in their ships to start protecting the Philippines, or would they want to take some countermeasures? And of course, it's situations like this that can quickly escalate. And let's not forget, it's not just the Philippines that are not happy about what's happening in the South China Sea. We've also got the long-standing dispute between China and Taiwan. And the USA has also said that they would support Taiwan if there was any form of military action. So we do have a potential powder keg situation here. Now, as it stands at the moment, we are not at that point. Both sides are posturing and saying that it's their territorial water. However, no shots have been fired, no military action has been taken. But the fact that 2 collisions have taken place over the course of the last few days does show that these ships are coming closer and closer together. So the potential for something to happen is rising. And if something does happen, it'll be really fascinating to see if the USA does stand behind the Philippines and decides to react. And if it does, what the Chinese will do in response to that. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments as and when they happen. Hopefully you found today's episode useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.